She had dreamed about it since she was a little girl, walking through the streets of Paris, standing before ancient castles, tasting the flavors of places she had only read about in books. For 79 years, Margaret held on to that dream, quietly, tenderly, never letting it go, even when life told her it might never happen. But now, as she packed her suitcase, her hands trembling with excitement, she realized that childhood wish was about to come true. She was finally going to Europe. What she didn't know was that this trip would bring her something far more powerful than just beautiful sights. It would awaken something inside her that she thought had been lost forever. Margaret had spent her whole life wondering what it would be like to see Europe. As a young girl, she would sit by the radio, listening to stories about far-off places, the Eiffel Tower, the canals of Venice, the cobblestone streets of old towns filled with history. She would close her eyes and imagine herself there, spinning in circles in a little dress, laughing in the sunlight of cities she couldn't even pronounce yet. Her parents, simple people from Ohio, would smile and pat her head, saying, "Maybe one day, sweetheart." But one day always seemed far away. Life, as it often does, had a way of moving quickly, pulling her from one responsibility to the next. School, marriage, children, work, each step forward seemed to push her dream further into the background. And yet, it never faded. Not really. It stayed there, tucked away in her heart, like a photograph she didn't need to look at to remember. Even now, at 79, the thought of Europe made her heart flutter. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the beauty, maybe the adventure, or maybe it was just the idea that something she had longed for as a child could still be within reach. But something inside her told her this trip was different. This wasn't just about seeing places. It was about proving something to herself and to anyone who thought dreams had an expiration date. As the sun set outside her window, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink, Margaret sat quietly, holding her old passport in her hands. She had never used it. Not once. But tomorrow, that would change. Tomorrow, she would step onto a plane and cross an ocean. Tomorrow, she would chase a dream that had waited long enough. But what Margaret didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the most unforgettable part of this journey wouldn't be the cities or the landmarks. It would be something far more personal, something that would change the way she saw the world and herself forever. Margaret lived in a small house on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. It was the same house she had moved into with her husband, William, more than 50 years ago. The neighborhood had changed over the years, new families moved in, old friends passed on, but her life remained steady, filled with the quiet rhythms of familiar days. Each morning, she would wake up at 6, make herself a cup of tea, and sit by the kitchen window, watching the world slowly come to life. Birds chirped in the maple tree out front, and the sound of distant lawnmowers or children playing brought a soft comfort. Her home was filled with little memories, the quilt she had sewn as a young bride, the photographs of her children and grandchildren smiling from the mantel, the old RCA radio that still worked if she gave it a gentle tap. She spent her afternoons tending to her small garden, reading books she had read many times before, or writing letters to her sister in Florida. It was a simple life, and for the most part, a happy one. But every now and then, when the house was quiet and the sun cast long shadows on the floor, she would think about Europe. She could still remember the first time she saw a picture of the Eiffel Tower. She was only 8, sitting in the dusty corner of the town library, flipping through a book about faraway places. The photograph was black and white, but to her, it was full of color, magic, even. From that moment, she wanted to see it for herself. And not just Paris. She wanted to stand in front of Buckingham Palace, ride a gondola in Venice, walk through ancient ruins in Rome. These places became more than just destinations. They were symbols of a world beyond her own, a world she longed to touch. But there was always something in the way. Money, first. Then time. Then family. She and William talked about traveling when they were younger, but there was always a reason to wait, a bill to pay, a child to care for, a job to hold on to. And when William passed away 10 years ago, Margaret thought perhaps the time for dreaming had passed too. Still, the idea never truly left her. It lingered, softly, like the scent of old flowers pressed in a book. And now, with her 80th birthday just months away, she wondered if this was her last chance. She looked around her home, at the walls that had held her life for so long, and whispered to herself, "It's not too late. Not yet." If you're still here with me, feel free to subscribe. There's still so much more to come in this beautiful story. But she had no idea that this simple decision to follow an old dream would open a door to experiences she never imagined possible. There had always been something in the way. Margaret could remember so many times when the dream of Europe had almost surfaced, only to be tucked away again like a delicate keepsake. As a young wife, she and William barely had enough to cover their bills, let alone think about vacations overseas. William worked long hours at the Ford plant, his hands stained with oil and metal, while Margaret managed the home, stretching every dollar, saving where she could. They talked about traveling. Oh, how they talked. On warm summer nights, sitting on the porch with a glass of iced tea, they would imagine what it might be like to walk through the streets of London or sit at a cafe in Paris. But it was always followed by a sigh. Someday, William would say, when things are better. But someday never seemed to come. Their first child, Michael, was born when Margaret was just 24. Then came Susan, 2 years later, and life became a blur of diapers, school lunches, doctor's visits, and growing pains. The idea of leaving, even for a little while, seemed impossible. Europe might as well have been the moon. Years passed. The children grew. The house filled with laughter, then with teenage moods, and finally with quiet again as the kids left to build their own lives. And still, Margaret waited. She waited for the right time, for the right moment when nothing would stand in the way. But there was always something, a leaking roof, a hospital bill, the unexpected turns that life so often brings. When William retired, Margaret thought perhaps this was it. Maybe now they could go. But his health began to decline. Slowly at first, a limp, then shortness of breath, then appointments that filled their calendar. She took care of him, lovingly, without complaint. But as she sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand in those final days, she knew that their dreams of Europe had quietly faded away. After he passed, people told her to take time for herself, to travel, to do something she had always wanted. But how could she? The idea of going alone felt overwhelming, almost foolish. She wasn't the kind of person who just packed up and left. She was the one who stayed, who kept things together, who made sure everyone else was okay. And yet, even with all that had held her back, the dream never truly left her. It remained, patient and persistent, whispering to her in the quiet moments, reminding her that there was still time. Maybe. There were days when Margaret truly believed the dream had faded for good. As the years crept on, she grew used to the rhythm of her quiet life. She filled her days with simple routines, visiting the local market on Saturdays, attending church on Sundays, sharing coffee with her neighbor, Helen, every Thursday morning. It was enough, or at least she told herself it was. She would sometimes catch a glimpse of Europe on the television, a travel show showcasing the hills of Tuscany or the romantic streets of Paris. She would watch for a moment, then change the channel, telling herself those places were for other people, younger people, braver people, not for her. That time had passed. Her grandchildren would visit now and then, filling the house with energy and laughter. They would tell her stories of their own lives, school, work, friends, and Margaret would listen, smiling, proud, though a small part of her envied their freedom, their ability to chase whatever they wanted. One afternoon, as she was dusting the shelves in her living room, she came across an old box tucked away behind some books. Curious, she opened it, revealing a collection of postcards she had saved over the years. Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Vienna. Some were gifts from friends who had traveled, others she had bought herself, long ago, when she believed they might one day be real destinations. She sat down, holding one card in her hand, a picture of the Eiffel Tower at night, glowing under a sky full of stars. A small note was scribbled on the back in her own handwriting. One day, I will stand here. Tears welled up in her eyes. When had she written that? It must have been decades ago. She had almost forgotten the girl who believed in that dream. Almost. Just then, A knock at the door startled her. It was her granddaughter, Emily, stopping by for a surprise visit. They sat together, chatting, and Margaret, still holding the postcard, couldn't help but share the memory. "I always wanted to see this," she said softly. "I used to believe I would." Emily looked at her, a spark of something bright in her eyes. "Grandma, why don't you?" Margaret laughed gently, brushing the idea away. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm too old for that now." But Emily didn't laugh. She leaned forward, taking Margaret's hand. "No, you're not. You've waited long enough." Margaret felt something shift inside her. A tiny spark, faint but alive. What Emily said next would change everything. Margaret couldn't stop thinking about what Emily had said. Even after her granddaughter left that afternoon, the words echoed in her mind like a soft song she hadn't heard in years. "You've waited long enough." There was something about the way Emily had looked at her, not with pity, not with amusement, but with genuine belief, that stayed with her, long into the evening. She sat in her armchair, the postcard still resting on the table beside her, and stared out the window at the fading light. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink, much like the sky she had imagined over Paris. Could she really do it? Was it possible? That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep would not come easily. Her mind wandered back to her youth, to the dream she had carried so long. She remembered being 12, sitting by the radio, listening to old love songs and dreaming of dancing in some faraway city. She remembered the feel of her mother's hands brushing her hair, and her father's voice telling her to dream big, even if life seemed small. But life had become small. Over the years, the walls of her world had closed in, not because she wasn't loved, not because she wasn't content, but because she had convinced herself that dreams were for the young. The next morning, she woke with a strange sense of urgency. As she prepared her tea, she glanced at the small calendar hanging on the wall. May. Her birthday was in August. 80, she whispered. The number felt heavy, yet somehow it pushed her forward. She found herself opening the drawer where she kept old letters and documents. Her passport was still there, untouched, still valid for a few more months. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. The picture inside looked back at her, a younger version of herself, hopeful, still believing that one day she would use it. Later that day, she called Emily. "What you said yesterday," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." "I meant it, Grandma," Emily replied. "You should go. I can help you. We can plan it together." The thought of having someone by her side, even just in the planning, made the idea feel less impossible. Over the next week, Emily would come over after work, bringing her laptop, travel brochures, and a contagious excitement that began to melt away Margaret's doubts. They talked about where she wanted to go: Paris, of course, but also Rome, London, maybe even Vienna. Margaret's eyes lit up as they looked at pictures of the places she had once only imagined. The Eiffel Tower at night, the canals of Venice, the grand cathedrals of Spain. It all felt like a dream, but a dream that was finally within reach. One afternoon, as they sat together planning, Emily looked at her and said, "You know, Grandma, this isn't just about seeing places. It's about showing yourself that you still can." Margaret nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. "I think I'm ready." She made the call that evening. Her voice shook as she spoke with the travel agent, explaining what she wanted, asking questions, feeling both nervous and excited all at once. By the end of the call, it was done. She had booked her first trip to Europe. She hung up the phone and sat in silence, the weight of the moment settling over her. After 79 years, she was finally going. But deep down, she knew this journey would be more than just a vacation. It would be the answer to a promise she had made to herself long ago. What she didn't know was that Europe held something even more powerful than the fulfillment of a dream. It held a lesson she had waited her whole life to learn. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind, and yet, every moment seemed to carry a quiet weight. Margaret moved through her house with a new kind of energy, one she hadn't felt in years. Each drawer she opened, each closet she searched, was part of something bigger, something that had once seemed so far away but was now becoming her reality. She started with her suitcase, The old leather one she and William had bought long ago, back when they still believed they might one day need it. It had gathered dust in the attic, waiting. She wiped it clean, running her fingers over the worn handle, remembering the dreams they had poured into it. As she opened it, a faint scent of cedar greeted her, and with it, a flood of memories. Margaret stood in front of her closet, unsure of what to pack. It had been so long since she had thought about what clothes she might wear in another country, in another world. She pulled out dresses she hadn't worn in years, a soft lavender one that always made her feel elegant, a warm blue cardigan that had traveled with her on many smaller journeys. She wasn't sure what the weather would be like, or what people wore in Paris or Rome, but it didn't matter. She chose what made her feel like herself. She decided to buy a new pair of shoes. Emily took her to the local store, where she tried on several pairs, laughing like a child when she found one that was both comfortable and pretty. "These will be perfect for all the walking you'll do," Emily said, helping her fasten the straps. Margaret looked down at her feet, feeling a strange mix of pride and nervousness. "I just hope they can keep up with me," she joked. There were moments of doubt, too. Late at night, when the house was still, she would sit in her armchair, staring at the itinerary Emily had printed out for her. What if she got lost? What if she didn't understand anyone? What if something went wrong? But then she would remember the postcard, the one she had kept for so long, and the little promise she had written on the back. "One day, I will stand here." That promise was stronger than her fear. Friends from church heard about her trip and called to wish her well. Some of them were amazed, others inspired. "At your age," one of them asked, with a tone of disbelief. Margaret only smiled. "Yes, at my age." Emily helped her with the details, renewing her travel insurance, arranging for a small guided tour in each city, teaching her a few simple phrases in French and Italian. Margaret practiced them, laughing at her own accent, but determined to make the effort. One evening, Emily brought her a small gift, a leather-bound journal. "For your trip," she said. "Write everything down. I want to hear all about it when you come back." Margaret held the journal close. She wasn't sure if she would write much, but the idea comforted her. It was something she could hold on to, something that would carry her memories even when the journey was over. The night before her departure, Margaret sat by her window, looking out at the quiet street she had known all her life. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if they too were excited for what was to come. Her suitcase stood ready by the door, her passport tucked safely inside her bag. She felt a gentle flutter in her chest, not fear this time, but something else. Anticipation. Hope. Joy. Tomorrow, she would leave. Tomorrow, she would finally see the places that had lived in her heart for nearly 8 decades. And yet, she still didn't know that what waited for her in Europe would be more than sights and sounds. It would be something she could never have imagined. The morning of her departure arrived with a soft, golden light filtering through the curtains. Margaret woke before her alarm, heart racing, her mind already filled with thoughts of what the day would bring. She sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, letting the reality sink in. This was it. After 79 years, the day had come. Emily arrived early, her smile bright, her arms full of energy and excitement. "Are you ready, Grandma?" she asked, helping Margaret with her suitcase. "I've never been more ready," Margaret replied, her voice steady but filled with wonder. The drive to the airport was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Margaret watched the familiar streets pass by, feeling a strange mix of comfort and detachment. This town had been her whole world for so long, but today she was stepping beyond it. As they neared the airport, the sight of planes soaring overhead sent a thrill through her chest. Inside the terminal, everything felt fast, loud, and unfamiliar. But Emily stayed by her side, guiding her through check-in, security, and finally to the gate. Margaret clutched her boarding pass tightly, her eyes scanning the crowd, taking in the vastness of it all. People rushing, laughing, calling out to loved ones. It was overwhelming, but exhilarating. When they announced boarding, Emily gave her a long hug. "Call me when you land," she said, "and take lots of pictures." Margaret nodded, her eyes misty but shining. "Thank you, Emily, for everything." As she walked down the jetway, the hum of the plane growing louder, Margaret felt her steps slow. This was really happening. She stepped onto the aircraft, greeted by the flight attendants, and found her seat by the window. As she sat down, buckling her seatbelt, she looked out at the runway stretching ahead. The plane began to move, slowly at first, then faster, until it lifted into the sky. Margaret pressed her hand to the window, watching the ground fall away, her town becoming smaller and smaller until it vanished into the clouds. She had never flown before, and the sensation was both strange and beautiful, as if the world had suddenly opened up, and she was floating right through it. Hours passed, a blur of in-flight meals, movies, and short conversations with the kind woman seated beside her. Margaret dozed off for a while, but woke just in time to see the first glimpse of Europe below. Fields, rivers, clusters of ancient buildings. It didn't seem real. When the plane touched down in Paris, a soft cheer rose from the passengers. Margaret's heart pounded as she stepped off the plane, breathing in the crisp, unfamiliar air. The airport signs in French, the sound of different languages, the rush of people all around, it was all new, all part of the dream. She made her way through customs, collected her suitcase, and followed the signs to the exit. A driver held a sign with her name, and soon she was in a car, gliding through the streets of Paris. As they crossed the Seine, and the Eiffel Tower appeared in the distance, shining in the afternoon light, Margaret's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming joy of it all. She was here. After a lifetime of waiting, she was truly here. And little did she know, the most beautiful moments were still to come. Paris greeted Margaret with a soft glow, the city alive with charm and movement. From the moment she stepped into her hotel room, with its small balcony overlooking a quiet street lined with cafes, she felt as if she had stepped into one of the old postcards she had saved for so many years. She stood on the balcony, breathing in the cool air mixed with the faint aroma of fresh bread and coffee. The sound of footsteps on cobblestone, the occasional ring of a bicycle bell, the soft murmur of French voices, everything seemed like music. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it wash over her. This was real. She was truly here. Her first morning in Paris was filled with wonder. She joined a small tour group, mostly other travelers her age, and together they wandered through the streets, visiting Notre Dame, strolling along the Seine, and stopping at a market where the colors of fruits, flowers, and fabrics seemed to dance in the sunlight. Margaret felt like a child again, eyes wide, heart open. But it was when they visited the Eiffel Tower that something shifted inside her. As she stood beneath its towering frame, looking up at the iron lattice against the sky, a tear slid down her cheek. This was the place she had dreamed of since she was 8 years old. And now, here she was, standing in the exact spot she had once written about on the back of a postcard. She touched the cool metal, her fingers lingering as if to make sure it was real. A guide offered to take her photo, and she smiled, the kind of smile that comes not just from happiness, but from the deep satisfaction of a promise kept. The days that followed were a blur of beauty and discovery. She traveled to Rome, where the ancient ruins seemed to whisper stories of a world long past. She stood in awe inside the Colosseum, imagining the lives that had moved through those stones. She tasted gelato in a small square, watching children play, and felt a simple joy she hadn't known in years. In London, she walked through Hyde Park, the leaves crunching beneath her feet, and visited Buckingham Palace, waving at the guards like a playful tourist. She laughed more than she expected, and each evening, as she returned to her hotel, she would write in the journal Emily had given her, trying to capture every emotion, every sight, every sound. But there was one moment, quiet and unexpected, that stayed with her above all. In a small chapel in Vienna, away from the bustling streets, Margaret sat alone on a wooden bench, the soft light from the stained glass windows casting colors across the floor. There was no tour guide, no group, just her and the gentle hush of the sacred space. She sat there, hands folded in her lap, thinking about everything, the years that had passed, the love she had known, the dreams she had carried. And for the first time in a long time, she felt complete. Not because she had seen everything, but because she had found something within herself. A quiet strength, a deep peace. And as she stood to leave, she knew that this journey had been about more than places. It had been about remembering who she was and who she still could be. As the final days of her journey approached, Margaret felt something unexpected, not sadness, but gratitude. Each city she had visited, each moment she had lived, was etched in her heart like a precious treasure. She no longer felt like a visitor chasing a dream. She felt like someone who had stepped fully into her own story, a story that wasn't over yet. Her last evening in Europe was spent in Paris, back where it had all begun. She had returned for one more look at the Eiffel Tower, wanting to see it at night, just as she had imagined it all those years ago. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and distant perfume. The city lights twinkled, reflecting off the river, and the tower stood tall, glowing golden against the deep blue sky. Margaret found a bench nearby and sat quietly, watching as couples walked hand in hand, children laughed, and street musicians played softly in the background. She wrapped her shawl a little tighter around her shoulders, feeling the warmth of the moment settle deep within her. She thought of William, of how they had talked about this place so long ago. She closed her eyes and smiled, whispering softly, "I made it, my love." And in that silence, she felt as if he were there beside her, not in body, but in spirit, proud and at peace. It wasn't just about seeing the world. It was about proving to herself that she was still alive, still capable of wonder, still open to joy. The girl who had dreamed of Europe hadn't disappeared. She had simply waited, patiently, for her chance. As she walked back to her hotel that night, Margaret felt lighter. She wasn't leaving Europe with regret or longing. She was leaving with a heart full of stories, of images, of feelings she would carry with her forever. On the flight home, she looked out the window at the clouds below, the sky stretching endlessly ahead. She didn't feel old. She didn't feel finished. She felt ready for whatever came next. When the plane touched down and the familiar sights of home came into view, Margaret smiled. She knew that while the trip had ended, the journey hadn't. Because now, she understood something that had taken her a lifetime to learn. Dreams don't fade with age. They grow stronger, waiting for the moment we are brave enough to follow them. Back in her quiet home in Ohio, everything looked the same, the familiar walls, the old clock ticking softly in the corner, the photos of families still smiling from their frames. But Margaret had changed. She moved through the rooms not as someone who had returned from a trip, but as someone who had rediscovered what it meant to live fully. She placed her suitcase gently in the hallway, not in a rush to unpack. Instead, she walked to her favorite chair by the window and sat down, letting the silence embrace her. She looked outside at the garden she had tended for so many years. The flowers were beginning to bloom, as if welcoming her back, reminding her that life, too, was always ready to begin again. On the table beside her, she placed the journal Emily had given her, now filled with pages of memories, sights, sounds, emotions, all captured in her own careful handwriting. She ran her fingers over the cover, smiling, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't known before. That afternoon, Emily came over, eager to hear every detail. They sat together for hours, laughing, crying, sharing the journey all over again through Margaret's words. When Emily asked her what her favorite moment had been, Margaret paused. "It wasn't just one moment," she said softly. "It was the feeling of knowing that I still could. That dreams don't have to stay dreams forever." As the evening settled in, Margaret felt something shift inside her. The trip to Europe had fulfilled a promise she had made to herself long ago, but it had also opened her eyes to something even greater, the realization that there was still more life to live, more stories to create, more dreams to follow, no matter her age. She stood, walking to the shelf where she kept her postcards. Carefully, she took the one with the Eiffel Tower, the one she had held onto for decades, and placed it in a frame. It wasn't just a symbol of where she had been, it was a reminder of what was possible. And to anyone who asked, anyone who wondered if it was too late, she would say this: it's never too late. Not to dream, not to live, not to begin again. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know, have you ever held on to a dream for years, just waiting for the right time? Or is there something you still hope to do? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe it's never too late to follow your heart, give this video a like. It helps us share more stories like this with others who need a little hope. Don't forget to subscribe for more journeys that remind us all the best moments in life can still be ahead.